Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now I can go back to where I was. Slideshow, we can start. Okay, so when I did my talk, and this actually, the question that you're going to see in a minute is about poverty, and we're going to talk more about that in class. So I'm going to skip past that one question. It was for them to think about, and at the talk. And by the way, it was all professors there, very few students, mostly professors, and only one person answered the question, which I thought was interesting. Was willing to say the answer, or willing to talk about the question. But anyway, so I was born with autism and dyslexia. I didn't actually have a diagnosis until I was 27 years old because I was in the rural areas where I am right now. Somehow I got back here. Don't ask me how. And so I was lucky, and I always talk about how I was so privileged because literally my mother sent me to etiquette camp basically every year for 5 years, actually, where I learned manners and I learned how not to tell people to fuck off. And so that was, and sometimes I still can, like this last week has definitely tested me. I told my insurance company today that I hated them just as much as I hated the thieves. That the only reason I wasn't going to embellish my theft is because I was too honest, and it was just disgusting, and I hated that too. So anyway, so I work on not doing stuff like that, and so when I started working at the public defender's office specifically, because I've done social work and art pretty much my working life, and a lot of times for myself, because I actually work better for myself. And so I actually ended up at the public defender's office for some years ago, and my job there was to create plans, because that's one thing people wired like me are really good. I'm very good at solving problems. I would say that's a talent. That and art are probably my two talents. And so I had a lot of complex cases that I solved. And when I say solve the case, that means find a way to keep the person out of prison and get them going, And so it could be a long process. So anyway, that's kind of what I did. And these people that get stuck in jail that have a mental health diagnosis, then they're in deep trouble. And that's a lot of what this work is thinking about. Because when somebody is in jail from a mental health diagnosis, they can literally spend more time incarcerated than the maximum penalty for their crime. So what I'm saying to you is that if they're like my one and only person that I have now, and I'm not even really 100% sure if I'm still in this case, is been in Brownfield jail, to the best of my knowledge, he's still there. He's now 6 months past the maximum penalty for his crime. He's still in jail. So that can happen with a mental health case really, really easily. And so this work is, when I started there, I thought a lot about lifting people up, but what I learned is that the only difference between me and the person that I was fixing their situation was that I had privilege and they didn't. And so the work I became basically, let me think of the word that I want to use. Oh my gosh, the tip of my tongue. Actually, I just became part of it, I guess, is all I can say. Is it implicated? That's the word. So I became implicated in the work, and then began to really start to think about what's going on in the justice system, specifically in mental health. And that's what this body of work thinks about. So in my talk at SPE, I just had to ask everybody a question, which was, what is your experience with poverty? And have you experienced poverty directly or indirectly? And how has it influenced your ideas and thoughts? And only one person, and this is the person that changed the talk, by the way, that changed her talk. she was the one that she answered it, and she talked a lot about growing up in poverty, and I think that's why she had to change her talk. But later she talked to me, and she sent me a message saying that she was so glad I had my talk, but she just was unprepared for the work. And in this area, there's not a lot of people that work in alternative processes. And my experience is kind of unusual in some ways. And so I have to remember that when I show the work. So that's why I'm kind of putting that all out there right now. So anyway, so what I wanted to talk about, let's just go into the body of work, and then I'm going to talk to you about how using photography literally saves lives. And I'll show you a case that I had that literally saved this lady's life by using imagery. So anyway, but let's move through here. So this is called the attorney visitation. That's in Lubbock County Detention Center. And that's where I used to go every day to see people in jail. And so this paper right here, you see, I think, does my pointer work? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So anyway, there's this, that's called a paper push. And that paper goes through there, and the person sitting over there reads the paper and signs it. And here's a telephone that you can talk on to talk to the person. But what I always did is just put my head down right here on my hands and then just flip through the paper push. And that's what the other person usually did too. And then you're literally having more of a, it's like you can see the person, if that makes sense, through there. There's air in between. And I think that must be, it's so that, and when COVID hit, then, it was really scary place to be, and especially for the people on the other side of the window. But people were literally just dying, all over. People were dying in the courthouse, people were dying in jail. And I'll just never, I don't know if as an artist and a social worker, social justice activist, any of that, I thought ever be the same from going through COVID, working in that area of and even before, as we built up to COVID, 2019 was rough too, but 2020 was bad. So anyway, that's the Lubbock County Jail. And that's where most of the images that I'm going to show you tonight came from. Not the jail, but people that came through the public defender's office and that we worked together. So this project took a really long time, and this is another kind of teaching piece. And the reason is because that I didn't make a picture of anybody unless they were competent to give their permission, or in this case, if they died. So this was a perfect example of summing up what happens in jail with people with a mental illness if there's a competency issue. And what that basically means is that is a person competent to answer to their charges. And if they're not competent, then they get stuck in a really bad situation where they have to go through competency, and depending on their level of their crime, depends on how long they're going to be waiting for that competency restoration. Like it could take 2 years for them to get into the hospital to do the restoration. So that's just time that they're sitting there waiting for nothing's happening. Their case is frozen. It's like they're just stuck. And in this situation, he got stuck in the isolation unit, and it got worse and worse. And that was during COVID. So he hung himself. It was terrible. And the really sad part and awful part of it is that everybody knew he wasn't competent, but the mental health, there was so much COVID stuff, and the mental health treatment is terrible anyway, put the COVID on top of it. And so, he died, and it was terrible. And so that was one. There weren't just people dying of COVID, but there were people dying like this. So I started just thinking about all the crime scenes I had been through over the 4 years, and I started to want to build laments. And a lament to me is like a poem, a visual poem of grief. It's lamenting what is happening that can't be stopped because the system is entangled so bad and it's so prejudiced that that people are just dying. And so, I just started lamenting these crime scenes that were mental health crime scenes because so many of them were really based on systemic racism and people not getting access to the care they needed to not commit these crimes. So to themselves or to anybody else. So that's why these pictures are hard. So now you're not going to see too much budding guts, but you're going to see intensity. And just before I continue on, since that happened at the other talk, is everybody going to be okay? Just say yes. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. 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 So I'm going to keep going. Here we go. Okay. So there's light at the end of this tunnel, but this is also the reason these are being daguerreotypes is because daguerreotypes have a reflective surface that when you look at this daguerreotype on the wall, you're going to see your own self as well. If you look one way, you're going to see it like this. And if you look another way, you're going to see a picture of yourself. It's a mirrored surface. So I wanted this work to implicate the viewer because this is going on because we're letting it go on. And because we don't have mental health care in Texas, I don't, in most conservative states and really across the country, there's not mental health care. So they're just putting people with severe and persistent mental illness in jail and just letting them rot. And so, and the jail, and I don't like the jail because these jails are serious business. They are not to be, if it's a county detention center, it's run by the sheriff. And one thing that's very, very important to know, and people don't think about, is literally the sheriff is the most powerful man in the county. He works for the governor. He does whatever he wants to do. So when you're in the jail, it's his house basically. And so a lot can go on that, you gotta be careful about, and people get in really bad situations. But the jail is not a mental health center, and the sheriff really should not be responsible for taking care of people with a mental illness. They need to be in a hospital and they need to be in transitional housing where they have constant case management, and then people can get better, but it takes a long time, and medicine's not very simple, as a lot of people know. So anyway, this situation should be really, is a human rights issue, should be completely unacceptable. So anyway, so what I started doing is, as people got better over time, I started making pictures. And in between these times, things would be great, and then things would be bad, like you saw in Keegan's situation. So this guy, I mean, and a lot of times people repeat because they just can't follow the rules. And the reason they can't follow the rules a lot of times is because nobody can follow the rules. They suck, So as soon as they violate their probation, they're going. And this guy, though, I think he ended up going back. Super smart guy, had a degree in engineering, but he got into meth. It's always meth that messes it all up. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Get back over there, James. Great guy, though. I really enjoyed him. And he was so fun to talk to because he was so smart. And so when I made these pictures, he was competent. And everybody that was photographed, I gave a photograph to a silver print, which is basically a darkroom print. And then made the daguerreotype. And another thing, the way that I explained to them to get a photo release, which may or may not be of interest, is that I basically said if I was an asshole, I could do anything I wanted with this photograph. Do you understand that? And if they said yes, then I said that's what that piece of paper gave me permission to do. So that way they would know in the worst circumstance, which of course I'm not an asshole, I hope. And so I haven't done anything with this work other than to give it agency, but they, that's how I explain to every person I photograph, especially a person with a mental health issue that's vulnerable, or a disabled person, an older, any person, because we don't know what people's vulnerabilities are. I tell them that that's what that get given a consent means, is that I can do anything I want with a photograph. And so in these cases, what I want to do with the photographs are make the daguerreotypes for the reasons I mentioned. So all of these people I knew, I really loved this girl, but you can see how distended her belly is from alcohol abuse and living on the streets. You really start to understand, or I did, and care about all these people, which is why they're in the photograph. And some of them, as you'll see shortly, literally have been in my life for 20 years. That's what I can't believe. So I haven't meant to be around this area because I've come and gone and come back. And, and interestingly, some of the people that came into my life before I left came back into my life after I got back in completely different situations, but still in process, in a certain kind of process. And anyway, but this girl, Kayla, I don't know, I don't even know if she's still living, but she was a really great girl, and she can't see in the daguerreotype, but she's holding her medication. So that's what I made the picture, because we can look at the sunglasses on the fence. There was a trailer there she was staying in, and she was actually about to get kicked out, because a lot of times people just can't leave the meth. It's usually 9 times out of 10 people are getting to a place where she was, have to do with a serious drug. It's rarely heroin, believe it or not, in this area. It's mostly ice and meth, and alcohol. So those are the three bad things. In the synthetic weed, which is what I think is ice, but as I get older, I'm not really sure. I don't even care as much anymore because I'm not needing to solve a case, thank goodness. But anyway, those drugs just ruin people's brains, and it's just terrible. And they're still good and kind and sweet, but they're sick, and so then that's when they need consistent and constant case management. She's a person that would need consistent and constant case management, but she still keep her chin up and stay beautiful. So then here's another lament to Justin Chisholm. And he actually was at the very beginning for me when I was first starting at the public defender's office. This was all going on. And the thing that had happened with him is that, as you can see, this was my boss that wrote that he was severely mentally ill. And look, and I don't know if either one of you know anybody, but when somebody has a severe and persistent mental illness, it's very, very possible to be psychotic and not know shit what happened later. It really is, man, if you put psychosis and a drug into it too, God knows what's going to go on, but if in a situation where somebody's suffering on a mental illness that's serious, then, if you do a medication change or anything like that, then, they need to be monitored very closely in the hospital, actually, for, a month to make sure that everything's going to work out. Because if they get psychotic, they might do something terrible in in believing that they're in a completely different world. And that's what happened here. And so the lament goes to both Justin and his daughter because he went to the hospital asking for help. They changed his medication and turned him around and sent him back. And he had a terrible reaction to the medication and went psychotic, and he killed his child. She was 4 years old, and he thought he was doing this whole biblical thing about the lambs, of God or whatever, wiping the blood on the door. And so when I was thinking about this Daguerreotype, this story is just terribly sad because when he came back into the real world, which took a very long time, by the way, he became competent, put it that way. When he became competent, he was so horrified at what had happened that he refused to take an insanity plea, and he literally was what a person that the law was written for, is because of that. And he would not do it. He was so distraught. The grandparents were so distraught. The grandparents had custody of the kid, but they thought he was okay. So it was just a home visit. But anyway, everybody was destroyed. And then at the sentencing, the mother, and this is to me just like the sort of the hammer that hits the nail all the way into the just horribleness, is that the mother was so distraught leaving the courthouse, she wasn't watching it. She got hit by a car. So going across the street. So, all of that whole entire family just cratered all over the mental health authority, which is who has to take these cases. Terrible treatment of Justin Chisholm. So that's why the lament goes to him, because he has to live the rest of his life knowing that what he did, because now he's sane. And they all of them who's left have to live with the terrible grief of what happened. So that's the seriousness of mental health in the justice system. So another guy, I put a lot of people in substance abuse treatment first, before we could do anything. So that's where a lot of people became competent. And this guy, it still goes to meth, but he, again, really nice people, but man, they will steal your wallet and help you look for it. And I'm not kidding. So, and I don't know if you guys know people that are addicted to a drug, but it's a little bit different than the way alcoholics function, which is just as bad. So I'm not, but there's all this legal problems from this. And, people like him that got mixed up in meth, and he was already borderline IDD. IDD means intellectual disability. And he, and interestingly, he was the one client that I had that was affluent, his family, and he was abused terribly growing up by his step-grandfather, his dad's stepfather, who was a prominent attorney in Lubbock. And he was basically, sex trafficked when he was a little boy. And so he just had all these different personalities. And he went to prison for 13 years for having, I think, a half a pound of marijuana. So he just wasn't, he was slow on the uptake, is all I can say. And then he got that, he was so dysfunctional, and he would end up, on the streets. He couldn't hold a job because he wasn't quite there. He needed he needs a case manager. I mean, the whole time I knew him, he thought he had HIV. I can't tell you how many times I took him to the hospital and tested him. I'd say, "You do not have HIV." And he would eat Wellbutrin, like he chewed them up, because he thought that's what was curing him of HIV. It was just a nightmare. But in the end, one of the things that he did, and I wish that my hard drive wasn't stolen because I would have been able to show you some pictures. And he, we created a garden to keep an eye on him so that he would stay out of trouble. So he had this garden in this vacant lot right outside my office that it just, I believe my cousin owned. So we put this garden there for him, and he grew these vegetables in the garden, and he was so great at this. And he would come walk to the office every day, get a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up, and just go out there numerous times and water the plants. Like he'd probably make 6 or 7 trips and just water with this 5-gallon bucket every single day. It was really a great experience to watch him, grow through that and stay out of trouble for 5 minutes. And so, and like I said, he was the one who spent 5 months longer in jail than the maximum penalty for his crime. And he was literally psychotic when he did it. He just stole the moving truck because he thought somebody was after him. So anyway, but this is the court. So this was at Catholic Charities, so I stuck him right there to make the picture. All right, these are very sad works, and I've been apologizing all along the way. So, but I'm not sorry either, because these stories need to be told. People need to understand what's going on, so that's why I make the work. Stricken lament to Rodney Stinkmore. This is one person that crossed in my life, like I was talking about earlier, over time. So I made, and when you look at our modules, you'll see it in module, I think it's module 1, you'll see a picture of an African-American guy that's been in the oil field. I think that picture is there. So that's Rodney Stinkmore. And I made that picture probably in early 2000, maybe 2000. Oh gosh, I just can't even tell you, maybe 2002. I'd have to look, really look back. But anyway, later I wanted to use that photograph to in a show, but I couldn't remember his name. So I put it in the post online garage sale. I put a picture and asked if anybody knew who it was. And all of these people came out of the woodwork that were his family and his social group, the people he hung out with, all came out, and we're still celebrating him as a person by using the same rhetoric. I could tell that they used when they talked to each other, like it was almost a reunion of people that came out for that picture. It was really beautiful. That's the power of photography. And so I learned of this, what happened to Stink is that this is in the rural area, kids can be a stinker. You're a stinker. So I know that's where Stink from, is that he was probably a stinker. And so he had 7 kids, so that's something too that might make me think he was a stinker right there. But anyway, he was killed in front of his kids, and it was a terrible thing by the police. He was psychotic on meth, and he was holding a steak knife, and the police didn't know how to deal with it, and they literally shot him in his chest, where they could have it would have been very easy to not do that and make another decision. But meth people can go crazy too, or ask people, and they don't know, of course, which ones, and they're not getting sufficient training on how to do that. Now in Lubbock now, since all of these things have happened over time, the police are creating programs where a caseworker who's a crisis worker will go with the police to these scenes to try to de-escalate the situation and prevent, violence from going on. But this is Tahoka, Texas, just 20 miles up the road. I just drove back from that area, because I just picked up the second air conditioner, which I'm not going to ruin this talk about. Sorry about that. So anyway, here we go. Let's keep going. So this was Stinkmore's brother. Another really beautiful story, but I'll just say that I connected with him from the Facebook page. Actually, no, it wasn't even the Facebook page. I went to a restaurant to get a salad, and it was him making the food. And it's in the rural area, so you're talking to the person making the food, because they're going to also be the person that checks you out. And so we talked, and I photographed him in the restaurant. That was his restaurant. And when his brother was shot, he was in prison, and so he didn't get to see the funeral. But what was great is I had the picture I made of him and the picture I made of Stink, and I put them together. So his name in real life is Jerrison, but he's Pookie. So they are in that family a lot of nicknames. And then they had the two photographs to give to the parents as well. So it turned out to be a really great thing that this story, as tragic as it is. All right, so this is another one, 43 arrests in my time with him, 43. I could do people. I used to just shake my head because every other day he was in jail. And this is another long term. I had her when she was a baby. Then she went back to her parents. Then her mother died of alcohol poisoning. Her dad was not capable. So she went to her aunt, who happened to be one of my clients. So then she came back into my life when she was 12, and I photographed her. I have those images. And then I was working in a completely different town, public defender in Lubbock, and she actually caught a case, and came back through as a mental health client. So this is her 21st birthday that I photographed her, and I realized I knew her 20 years on that time. So I'm just like amazed by her. She lives, I keep up with her and her brother and her aunt. I photograph them as regularly as I can. I'm a little bit lazy about making work right now because I've been so busy, but I do try to photograph them at least every 3 years. So this guy is one of the last ones, and he was just always such a fun guy he used to write me love letters from the jail. Little hearts, that he would write on his letters. And so that's a picture. I was sending him to see his mother, and I was hoping he would stay, which he didn't. But he just, couldn't give up the booze, but he was dear. He really was. And another lament to baby Alex, another baby going back home when they shouldn't. The system's, mean, and the mother's got a meth habit. I tell you, meth in CPS, and this seems harsh because I am as easygoing, and I'd like to think fairly progressive. If it's a meth and a baby issue, I wouldn't let a baby go back, because the drug, so many people can't kick it, and then these things happen. And this mother was psychotic. And then there's the whole issue of, okay, they have a meth-induced mental illness. Does that make it any less different than an organic mental illness? That becomes the question. And if the mental illness is physiological either way, I mean, really, it probably shouldn't matter. It's tragic on the meth side, but punishing somebody with the same kind of mental illness that somebody else has, that's, it's severe one way and the other's another way, it's tricky. And I don't know that I don't know that that's the best solution, because they're just as sick. And so, and in this case, that's what happened here. The mom just couldn't leave the meth alone, and the CPS just wasn't paying attention. And so this happened. Again, systemic racism. CPS would blame it on their phone. Actually, after this happened, they changed things. Actually, the state of Texas now is contracting with a private agency to do protective services, and it's a lot better than it was in this case. So it was this case and a couple of others. All right, so let's go here to a little bit less depressing work. That this is, you saw the AB before, and so now what I did as I started to wind up my time there is I started thinking about systemic racism in a big way, because believe me, like I said, the difference between the side of the glass that I used to sit on really had a lot to do with the education and privilege. And so even though I didn't have the diagnosis until I was an adult, my mother made sure that somebody was drilling into my head of what I had to do to get along socially. I got spankings every year in school and all that. I could not be still. And I still struggle with all of that. So, but regardless of all that, I had nutrition. I had all the things that my mother, that's one thing, I always said my mother was like the ass queen, but she was really good at nutrition and she did a few things right, and I think that's something, considering the time, remember I'm 62 now, so considering the time that it was, I think my mother in the rural area, as conservative evangelical as it is now, it certainly was more then. And so, yeah, so I always feel like that I was blessed in that way. So on this side of the glass, I started thinking about how race and poverty have everything to do with what's going on. And privilege has everything to do with who's making the rules. So here we see who creates policy in the state of Texas. And it's sort of a chronological way that things go down, are up either way, but the governor approves all policy. These guys create the policy. These guys write policy as well. There's the sheriff, again, very powerful. He's got more clout than the county commissioners here, the judges, district county judges, district attorney, the public defender's office, and the chief defender. So I wanted to put them on this plexiglass in an AV room, create that. And then I wanted to write on the back of that, on the wall, I wanted to write their color of their skin, their race. And so here you can see, if you look through the glass, the race of the guys creating the policy. And then when you look at the other one over here, then these are all mugshots I pulled out during December 2020 and December, January, and February of 2020 and 21. And one of the worst times, I think, for I would say one of my darkest times, and it was right after I stopped working there. And by then, literally, I look back now, then I didn't think I was screwed up in my head, but I look back now and I'm like, woo. So I was entrenched in this work, but at the same time, I was struggling with my own issues. And I literally got a hold of myself by walking and by continuing yoga and just a slow road, of getting back to a healthy individual, a healthy person, healthy thinking person. But this work came out of it, and I'm super grateful for that. So this is the mug shots. I pulled those all through, and I created this grid. Let me see. I think you're going to be able to see. And then I wanted to write the race of the person behind the mug shot on the wall there. So I wanted to be able to talk about how it's white male privilege that's creating policy that benefits white male privilege. It certainly does not benefit people of color and people that are in class poverty. So then this other piece you see right here, the other big piece on the wall, that started as a piece in Arizona that I made from Sheriff Joe. And those are mugshots off his mugshot of the day. But then when I was in Lubbock and I was wanting to talk about how many people go through the mental health system every 6 months, every year, 500 people move through the mental health system in 6 months in Lubbock and through the jail. So they're arrested and processed as a mental health crime, 500. And so I wanted to talk about that in number on this gem piece, but I didn't also want people and my people that I was working with, because I was having an exhibition in East Lubbock where a lot of them are from. That's where this exhibition went at. So I didn't want them I wanted them to have agency, and I didn't want to control if they were if how they would feel about if their face was on the mental health piece, basically. So instead of putting these mugshots here, which are integrated, mental health cases are integrated into all of these. There are all kinds of people. I just took them off the mugshot part of the gel. Then and to create and then put them in a grid, and it was very time consuming. I'll tell you that, it took forever. But and then created this next grid, which took forever. And of course, later somebody told me an easier way. You just want to die, you want to go, okay, well, don't tell me that. But anyway, this grid was 10 types, and it represented the mental health cases, but nobody in Lubbock would be on that grid because they were mugshots from Phoenix, which still gave agency to the idea that protected the people that I wanted to protect. I didn't want them to be any different than the people in the other piece. And so that's how I worked that out. And so this is a close-up of the piece. And these down there, the paper pushes, more about finding connection in the communication during that time. Here's a close-up. And here's a close-up of the gems. These gems really opened a lot of doors for me, I'll tell you that. I've used them in all kinds of different ways. I'm gonna actually, these are gems are gonna have a piece of shiny tin behind them, so you can see the back of the bottle caps because they're so cool. But they really have conceptually, talked about the kind of atrocities that Sheriff Joe was doing, and then they came in handy again here for this piece. So the gems are probably one of the strongest pieces I've ever created, because they've been they've given a voice to those who haven't had one in just so many different ways. There's a close-up of those. And so here you can see the pieces lit, that how on the wall you're seeing a negative. So, and basically I'm talking about the impact of this systemic racism that goes on through the justice and mass incarceration. And so then of course you're seeing the negative on the wall to talk about, conceptually what's about projection, what's going on anyway, I guess. I hope I'm making sense with that. So there we go. I'll keep going. And then here, this is an installation thinking about Keegan Cloud, who we saw at the beginning of this talk. This is an installation of the size of the shoe that he was stuck in for months, 4 to 5 months, maybe closer to 6, with no communication, with nothing, a drain on the floor. That's pretty much that situation. So I wanted people to have a feel for what somebody like him that has a severe and persistent mental illness, what that might really be like, just in there, if you don't have one, imagining, I hope, what it would be like if you did have one, how that would feel, what would be going on, and how then you might think about the human rights issue apparent when thinking about it from the perspective of space. So that's how that piece went. And those again were images I made in another gel and had engraved on plexiglass, but became handy once again for this exhibition to create the space for Keegan Cloud. So there was in the walkthrough. So then at that exhibition, because I'm basically a social practice artist in so many ways, because I always end up doing social work. I'm actually still doing a little bit of social work, but I'm trying to move away from it. This is during the exhibition, we made cyanotypes with the kids in East Lubbock, and that was a very fun thing. I could do these kinds of things all day long, and I actually did it at the Garden Arts Center not too long ago too, with kids. So these are, and I like that, and adults too, like community kinds of things. I love working that way where just people come in and make art. And that's what happened here and also in another place. So here they are. There's the exhibition you see, but here we put paper down. We're going to town. So there we gave them transparencies where they're like can draw on there. And then there you go. There's cyanotypes they're making. That's me, of course, in the middle of it. And this is Danielle, who actually is the executive director of the East Lubbock Art House. And I think on module 1, I think I left her talk because she's a pretty important mentor and activist. She's built the East Lubbock Art House from scratch, and she's pretty amazing. And so she just got a grant not too long ago for significant. And I know because I'm on the board, and I'm super proud of her. She's young, and she really has made quite a difference in East Lubbock. Always doing mural projects. I'm always trying to get her to talk to the class, but she is very busy. And so, and I need to do more. Probably need to go volunteer more, and she probably would. But anyway, this is she, and she's pretty amazing. All right, so let's talk about a little bit more about how photography can save lives. And the reason, I told you before that I'm pretty good at solving problems and had a lot of complex cases. And I wanted to talk about one named Donna here, and she was 62 years old. She was younger than that when I met her. So we knew each other. Oh, I would say we've known each other. I might have met her in 2018. So she had a meth charge, always meth. So she had a meth charge. And she also was interesting because she was older. So 2018, she was probably 59, maybe 60. And so she had never had a job other than as a prostitute. That was it. She'd been to prison numerous times, never received treatment. And she was from a very rural area. And I'm not going to go into her history too much because I think it might traumatize y'all. But she had a terrible, terrible, terrible history. And so as I got to know her, the first time she came through, we got her off and she went right back out and was using meth. And then, so she got back in, and then that charge, she was going to go to prison for life. That was like, they call it the bitch. She only has 3 big charges. After you go to prison once, you go to prison twice, you get another big charge. They say, okay, you're going to go back forever. And so that's where she was. So she wasn't eligible for probation, but she was also in her 60s. And as we talked, because she was stuck in jail because of her situation, and as we got to know each other, I realized that over time that her situation, there was some serious mitigated circumstances in her situation. So I asked her attorney if she would, because her attorney was just going to actually sign her off, to go to life. That's where we were. And I asked her attorney if she would let me try to work a plan and use mitigation and research to show why she shouldn't go to prison for the rest of her life, to show why she should be given a chance for treatment and a chance for life. So the attorney said, okay. And this, like I said, was in the middle of COVID. Then COVID hits. We're working on this plan. It was very long. The plan it went on like a year and a half. So what we had to do is we had to think about using photography. Oh, why aren't we moving? Let me see if I can go here. There we go. We had to think about using photography to convince the district attorney. Photography, mitigation, storytelling. Basically, we're telling a story here. So we needed to create a document, because remember, our criminal justice system is all about punishing people. It's punitive. It's like one of the worst in the world. And so the idea was to persuade the district attorney to let us try something different with Donna. So here she is when she's little bitty. You see her right here. Is everybody still seeing everything? Just say yeah. Just, somebody say yes. Okay, cool. So is everybody doing okay? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so here she is. She's 5 years old here, and she was raised on the Texas-Oklahoma border, and that is very, very rural. And I gotta remember the name of the town. I don't remember, but it'll come to me. It was very, very rural. Not too much. Actually, it was more rural than Ryan. That's actually saying something. So, it would be, that rural would be like, 2.5 hours to a city, maybe, and then maybe an hour to a little town. So her family were farmers. They didn't necessarily own the farm. They would just farm the land. And she had a lot of brothers and sisters. So so what I first decided would be important was to find out if there was a record keeper in the family, to find out that, there's always in older families, and now it's different in the digital age, but remembering that she was older, then there's always photographs. Somebody usually has a lot of photographs. You just got to find the person. I always call them the record keeper, because they're the ones that made the pictures and took the trouble to develop them, or took the trouble, if somebody died, to keep the pictures that the person who died had. And in this case, it was her sister-in-law. So I started working with her sister-in-law to find a way to start to tell the story about the horrible abuse that Donna went through in her lifetime. So I didn't want to just start with Donna. I wanted to start with the way the family system was working. So I'm taking it to a little bit more complex level. But what we have to do, remember, I said a minute ago, is to persuade. So the DA is not going to persuade on emotion. We need to have facts driven by emotion, and then integrate the emotion into persuading them to look at the facts the way we want them to see the facts. And in Donna's case, this fact was that her mother and her sister were also related up here. So there's this incest going on at the earliest levels. Before Donna was even born, there's incest. And it's right here. So this is her uncle and father and grandfather are the same person, basically, who is Donna's sister. So that's starting here. And so here we have, and so here it comes. So the women in this family, which is interesting, she was the last surviving woman in this family, which I think is another interesting thing to acknowledge. So what I did is I just created a family tree. Before the DA even got into my plan, I wanted them to start to understand the dynamic of the family visually. So then whenever I talk about him or her or whatever in the paper or in the plan, then the DA can reference or move back to the visual. And the visual is what's going to stick. So I started thinking about these photographs and how to place them in this 50-page plan, believe it or not, 50-page plan. So we started talking about what happened to Donna in her life. And I had to go to every place to investigate to see if these things were true. And it was amazing because remember, Donna's 62, the things that happened to her were in the 60s and 70s in the most rural part of Texas in these farmhouses. And I found the farmhouse, one of the farmhouses, that one of the worst heinous things that happened to her was And I found the owner to it. It was a lot of investigation. And whenever I called them, told them who I was, they knew why I was calling. They knew, remembered. It was that terrible. Remembered what had happened. All these years later, the owner was old. He was in the 70s. And he went to the house and made the pictures for me to help Donna. And so, because everybody knew what happened to her and nobody did anything. And 50 years later, there I'm calling. Ooh, when I talk about it, it makes me emotional. 50 years later, when I'm calling, then they say they're going to help Donna, and they did. So here we've started placing these pictures to tell the story of what happened to her. And so whenever something would happen to her, I would find an image of that age and I would place it. And then when there was a perpetrator, I would place them and literally adjust the image to make it so that it would be easy to identify that person as the perpetrator to the crime. So and then in her crimes that happened during her life in Lubbock and adult life, I went to all those places and photographed those places and placed them into the image, into the plan, so that when the DA is reading all of this, then they're seeing where this happened. And then again, there's her sisters, her sisters, and then moving it back to the family, back to what happened to these women, back to all the injustice of their life. And then in the plan, thinking about, okay, so now I've told them all this stuff's happened. Now I want to give them a plan that they can't, that's perfect, that they can't help but be on board with. So then look at these color photos. So these came from Norway. Get this, I went to a trip to see the most humane prison in the world. This was it in Horten, Norway. It's called Bastoy. And I made these pictures. This is their farm. They farm organically. Everybody works together in that prison. So I had these pictures from that, and I was able to start to talk about a really positive recovery plan for Donna, starting and integrating. What I wanted to do was integrate nutrition as one of the reasons, which is really true, of why people are committing crimes. So remember this, when we start to talk about this rehab program I wanted to do with her, then it had to have, wasn't just pictures, then there had to be research that had integrity, peer-reviewed research, basically. So then to convince the DA factually that the reason this all happened was these reasons, and with this treatment, this person can get better. And so, but remembering that they're punitive, I would say then, okay, so I wanted to go to this rehab center, but I want them to know that there's a mean, horrible jail right next door. So if she doesn't keep her shit in one sock while she's at this rehab center, then she can go do her rehab over there in jail. So that's what I wanted the DA to be saying. Oh, well, she's going to be over here, but if she screws up, which she will, I'm sure they were saying, then she'll end up over there, and it's going to be their problem, and they can sentence her, and that can go from there. You see, so or they'll extradite her back, and then we'll go to court, and that'll be the end of it. You know, so that's what I wanted the DA to maybe be thinking, to get us, get back into the to get her into that rehab and not to prison. So I started talking about research that would help us with that, and use pictures to guide them to the plan and why the plan would work. So here we go. See, I showed them a picture of the Garza County Jail, which is where you can buy food. Noticing that all of you, I hope if you can see that, that's all bad food. There's not anything in there that is not a preservative, something that will kill you if you eat it all the time. And then over here in Norway, of course, they're teaching people how to eat and how to cook and all those things. And you can notice that their store is all about a healthy lifestyle. So I started talking about that, and how if we could get nutrition done into a nutritious regiment that would help her emotional health, mental health, her criminal behavior, and all that stuff. So then I also want to talk about, because I'm from an evangelical area, I wanted to talk about, the spirituality of all of it and how Donna could find the light. And, so I had this image that I love. Actually, I am a spiritual person. I'm more concrete, so I won't get into how I see religion, but I wanted to use this image for them to say, give her another chance to get through, and we will work on her spiritual growth. That's part of a plan. It was like a 6-point plan. And then I put a family album into where the images were bigger, so that they could see that some of the people that were her terrible abusers also in her family during that time were making their own children. So that was Donna, and she got, by the way, she got 10 years probation. She's actually doing great. I talked to her maybe 6 months ago. She wants to get a degree in photography. I hooked her up with Betsy and Ashley. I'm not sure if she's in our program yet. I hope so. She's pretty amazing, and she's a miracle person. And so I'm really proud to know her, and she hung on. It was a long time. We both had to chip away, and we had COVID to get through all along, and we just kept going, and it paid off. And she has always been grateful. She lives with her sister-in-law, the record keeper, and her brother, and they're doing it. She really loves it there, she told me. So they live out in the country, not in the area where they were, in a beautiful area, and more towards, I could think, going towards Stephenville, and maybe that's towards the Dallas area. So, okay. So then I want to just give you a little thing about Fabian and how he used images to communicate, and how I used images to save myself, and putting the trauma of dealing with people's trauma into a space that was a way that we could work, and I could work and not go crazy myself. So there's like, I've seen terrible things, and there's a few things that were on the surface visually less terrible, but emotionally more terrible than anything. And those are things in that I had to definitely put in a photograph so that I could save myself. And that was this thing with Fabian. So he was always, I had known him 5 years, I think. And he was a person that was in jail for, again, longer than the maximum penalty for his crime. And his crime happened to be, when I first met him, that he stole a Twinkie. And when he found out of a store, and he got stuck in the system waiting for restoration, and we finally got out, it was like a 1.5 years later, there was no place to place him because he lost all his benefits. So there's no money anywhere, and you have to reapply. But of course, if you don't have your driver's license, your social security number, any of that stuff, it's an ordeal. And that's his situation. And plus he was also very mentally ill, and also had, as well as drug-induced mental illness. He had both mental illness. So he actually had to go to this house to stay while we were getting him hooked up on housing. And it was his dad's house, but there was literally a shell. There was no utilities in that house, and water, anything, electric, anything. It was February, cold. And so finally, right before he couldn't make it, right before we got him placed, he went just crazy, and he went psychotic, and he was using, and he thought that his sister was buried alive under the house, and he had that shovel that you see on that photograph, and he was digging 1,000 miles an hour. His family called me, not knowing what to do. He had been digging and digging. I got there, it was still digging, just sweat pouring everywhere. And just, he would not believe that his sister was not under there. And the terror that he emanated is what messed in my head, I think. It was so, he was so terrified that, and he was so messed up on whatever he was using. And he was so mentally ill because he'd stopped taking his medicine weeks before, because it's just too hard when you're cold all the time. And so this happened, and finally, actually the mental health authority was zero help, but he finally gulped down a huge big red, and you would think that would have killed him, but it didn't. And he sat down and he wasn't making any sense, but he stopped digging, and then eventually he kind of got a little bit better. And then it took another little while before the mental health authority would literally take him into the hospital. And so, and when I say a little while, a few weeks, and then finally another episode like that happened, and I got him in. But it wasn't like that. So anyway, I had to make that picture because I had to create, it'll probably go into a daguerreotype, but it became a lament, because I don't believe that he would have done all of that had he had his basic needs met in the first place. And because of the way systemic racism works, then his basic needs couldn't be met. It took months. And then finally I got him on disability and everything, got a huge check, and I placed him in Houston, and he did okay for a minute. He was super excited about it. We wanted to get him out of reach of all the people that he was living with on the streets, and his father, because they just would take his checks. And anyway, so we sent him to Houston, and he got there and liked it for a minute and didn't after that. And so he would send me these pictures, and we talked every day for the longest time, and he was sending these pictures. And at one point he jumped out the second-story window of the placement, and this was at the hospital. He broke his foot, and he sent that picture. So that's him. And I don't know where he is now, but I'll tell you one thing, when I got his check, we paid for his placement, and we also got him a burial policy so that when he does finally die, he won't be buried in some bad place. I don't know if he's going to make it through. He once told me that he has to use ice because his brain's already on fire, and that's what puts it out for just a minute. But there we are together. That was right when I finally got him out of jail for the next time that he was in jail forever. Then we were going to place him in Houston. So actually, art saves lives. And this are some of those same people that you saw in the daguerreotypes, a few of them, at a clay workshop. So when I talk about community and agency, these are things, to think about, not to go over your head, in other words, do too much that's, beyond what you can do, but to think about how can you be involved in whatever it is you love, and in a way that benefits for the greater good. And that's how I had that opportunity to do that. And so this was a clay workshop with all those people. And this guy right here, Caesar, I hope he's okay. 3 years still in the 6-pack. I mean, it's all about the benefits and getting them and how you can place people. But he was placed him in a residential nursing home in a different little town because they would let him stay for free for a while. Those benefits started, and I would go get him and take him. And so when then COVID hit, I don't know what happened. Sometimes I want to check, but sometimes I'm scared. And this is Dee. Her name's Devanya, and I call her Dee. And so the last thing that you're going to see with her is that she and I did this video because we decided that it would be cool to go to the NOMNI conference, which is the National Association for Mental Illness. And it was in Houston, and they have a way that you could apply, but because I have dyslexia and she, I know has a learning disability, just didn't get the intervention that she needed. So we did a video to get, and we won the scholarship to go, and we went to podcast, which I'm not going to show you tonight, but I think you'll see the video, and it was a lot of fun to do it. So it's a way to be in the community again, to think about how can I work in a community. Oops, dang it. Okay, here we go. I hope it's not too loud. Oh, I'm the scroungy one.
Can't hear it.
Oh, you can't? Okay. Can you hear it?
No.
No.
Oh, dang it. I don't know what to do about that. I can't tell you what to do. And you know what? I don't even think I can figure it out. So I might just have to figure it out on my own and then put it on there. Can y'all be okay with that? So basically what we were just talking about is she was telling everybody why she wanted to go to the conference and how it would benefit her. And she was just so gracious and talked about her kids and how she wanted to build a community of support for mental illness and all of things like that. We won it, and we went to the conference and we made a podcast. We also talked about that on the video, that we were doing a podcast. And we did. Devania was so good. I was terrible. She was great. I'm not gonna lie. She looked good. Look at that. You can see the two of us. I'm the scruffy one. She's the one that's dressed up. We had the best time. I will never forget that experience with her. And she just looked so beautiful. All the guys were chasing her around in the hotel. I had to beat them off her. She had her hair like so fixed. And oh my gosh, and it was so fixed, it hurt her head. And I remember I would tell her, okay, like, take it down, like, stop hurting. And she was like, no, beauty is pain for Black women. She said, so finally we were at the airport coming back, and she was going on about her head hurting. And I said, I'm just gonna pull that hair down myself. And there was this guy in front of us, this African-American guy, and he turned around and he goes, if you pull her hair down, she'll probably kick your ass. You never mess with her. And she had been telling me that the whole time we were in the hotel. I swear we were laughing. She was the best time. But she really did a lot of great things. But then, of course, she had to come back to poverty and all that. And so she did good for a little bit, but then let me move. She went back to the way that she did things a lot with her life. So anyway, but I don't know where she is now. Every once in a while I get a text, but I try not to get into those lives anymore, because there has to be a time where that stops. So, okay. So is there any questions? No? Did anybody get freaked out?
I feel like we should have a separate discussion, but
Oh, are you okay? Is everybody okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So nobody wants to ask any questions?
I had some regarding the coursework, but not regarding.
Let me end this share screen right here, and then we'll just go back to the I think if I stop, I was recording. Wait, I don't know what I gotta do. Let me get out here. I think I might be able to pause recording and it not stop. Let's not get that word. Oh, there it is.